At this time, I would like Maya Hampshire, one of our education students here at the University of Findlay, to come and introduce our next speaker.
Good morning. Thank you all for coming here today on a Saturday. I'm so excited to have this honor of introducing you all to award-winning children's book author and illustrator Carin Berger. Along with various other awards and acknowledgments, Berger has been awarded the 2006 Founders Award from the Society of Illustrators, the Bestest Show from 3x3 Magazine for the Children's Book Show, and the Bull Branson Award. Known for her creativity, many of her picture book illustrations feature pieces from newspapers, ticket stubs, or even intricate cut paper collage images featuring in large shapes and impressive contrast. Her visual arts offer a unique touch that is truly an artistic treat to every reader. With this being said, Carin Berger has also been noted for her spontaneous and expressive talent for creating children's books. One of Berger's most noted works is The Yellow Leaf, published in 2008. This book has won multiple awards, including the Best Illustrated Children's Book in 2008. Her most recent publication, A Curious Menagerie of Herds, Flocks, Sleeps, Gaggles, Scurries, and More, was published in 2019. This piece has it all, with both remarkable artwork along with an educational text that is perfect for young students in the classroom. Carin Berger now resides in New York with her husband and daughter. Again, I'd like to express my gratitude for this opportunity to introduce this talented author and illustrator. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Carin Berger.
Well, let's see. Does that work? I'm not very good at that. Okay. Oh, there you go. Now I don't have to be on my tippy toes. Gosh, well, thank you so much for having me. I was here once before, about 10 years, and the Mazza Museum is just an incredible resource and an incredible place to get to come visit. I mean, you're so warm and knowledgeable about books, and the museum's incredible. So thank you for having me. Thank you, Ben. And thank you, Maya. Some tough acts to follow. I think, I was just saying to Maya, most of us didn't set out to make picture books. We kind of backed into it in different ways. And today, I'm going to talk to you about my backwards fall into picture books. Oh, there we go. Oops, there we go. So I write and I illustrate and I design my books. My background's in graphic design, which isn't such a far reach because in graphic design you're working with words and pictures, and these are some of the books that I've made. And some more. And so as a kid, like everyone else that I think is going to follow me and who's preceded me, I loved to draw. I loved to make things. That was definitely on my radar. My mom was an elementary school art teacher. And when I was 10, I got a new cousin, and I was so excited about her, Sarah. And it was the first time. I was always making stuff, but it was the first time that I actually made a book. And I made a book for Sarah, and I did it outside of school, and I did it just because I loved her and was so excited about her. And Sarah, who has since become quite a well-known sculptor, now that she's grown up, recently gave the book back to me, maybe 10 years or so. And the book was called The Naughty Jester, and it was all about this jester that was not very good at his job and got into trouble in the castle, and nobody loved him except for Sarah. And the reason that I'm bringing it is because, and a couple of early pieces of art, is because in looking back at it, I'm like, oh, I was making collage as a kid. And also, a lot of the things that I drew as a kid still show up in my artwork. So, for example, if you look at the red arrows, you'll see like a teddy bear and a doll and a bluebird and a car and juggler. And here's a page from the first book that I did, and I clearly hadn't matured that much or developed very far as an artist. I was still drawing or collaging jugglers and bears and toys and here's another piece of art that I made also around that same time, I think, and also collage. And I didn't just work in collage, but I clearly did a lot. And here's a bunny and birds, and here's a piece of art. Here's a jacket from one of my books. And so stories, like this is a story, we were going to go live in Japan, and my daughter was feeling sad about leaving her friends. And this is a story about a bunny and a bird that were really good friends and had to have that friendship endure over time and space. And as a kid, I was really interested in visual storytelling. I mean, I think that's a really accessible entry point to storytelling for a lot of people and making sense of the world, and that was sort of important to me. And this is a card I made for my mom, and it was for Mother's Day, and it was a gift certificate. Her car was really dirty, and so this is the front of the card before it's open, and her car's really dirty, and then it's past the car wash, which was me, and now it's clean. And but that visual storytelling, using the pictures to tell the words, is something that I still do, and I'm still really interested in, and I feel like it makes it, that we're all becoming more and more visual in this digital world and need to be sort of literate visually. So I guess it's on your right-hand side, is the front cover of my first book, and on the back cover, on the other side is the back cover. And I liked the idea of, while you were busy reading the book, all these things changed between the front cover and the back cover. And I love to go into schools and sort of talk about that with kids, about how do you tell stories with pictures. And can you look at this and sort of figure out some stories that might have happened here? Like, where did the fox go, and did he leave anything behind? And what happened to the type? And the guy in the car on the top. So there's a lot of stuff, and if you spent some time, you could make your own versions of what happened. So that's something that I care a lot about. And I work with really rudimentary materials. I work with, actually, when I first, I thought that I would do painting or something when I first sort of wrote my first book, but I really worked with what I had around me, which was a lot of scraps. I worked with glue that's kind of similar to Elmer's glue, and I work with scissors that nobody else is allowed to touch because I got to keep them sharp, and an X-Acto knife, and I go through probably 200 blades in a book. And I work with ephemera. I work with found papers, and I like those because they come with their own secret histories and baked-in stories, and I like the layers of meaning that those add. And I'm pretty deliberate about what I'm using, which I can show you later. But some of the paper is just literally stuff I find on the street. Like, I might be walking down the street and go, oh my gosh, that's a really good number 2. Or, on that smushed up piece of paper. Or I also work with old ledger books and old letters, and again, I'm sometimes aware of where they came from and what their histories are, but I think that they add like this sort of extra patina and extra level to what I'm doing. And I work with really basic stuff like magazines and J. Crew catalogs, and you can see I've cut stuff out. I have stuff organized by colors and textures and polka dots, and then you'll see that sort of at work here, and there's some details. And I guess to amuse myself, kind of not unlike Raul, I'll put stuff into my art. I'll put like a name of a friend, like there's Dagmar up on the car, or my daughters always throughout my book. You'll see a lot of T's and Taya. And I use typography, like the guy in the front of the car, his face is made out of a D and parentheses and eyes, so O's, his eyes are O's. So I'm really playing as I'm making, and the guy in the back of the car his wing has California on his wing, and so that's some place that's meaningful to me. So there's just a lot of personal layers that I'm adding as I go. My process is really pretty basic. As I said, I write and illustrate. The words usually come first, but even though I like a really spare text and I like something that's barely there and poetic, I work really hard and there's like a million iterations before I've got it pared down to where I want it. And so I usually, not always, but I usually start with a text or a seed of an idea. Like The Little Yellow Leaf is a book about being ready for change. And my husband jokes that it was an autobiography because I'm not so good with change. But I was really thinking my daughter, who wasn't so good with transitions and change. But I was also thinking of, I sometimes when I'm stuck, I don't nap, I walk. And I was walking one fall, and I live in New York City, and I saw this one tree, and it just had like one or two leaves on it. And I was thinking about that sort of resistance to change and the inability to kind of jump in. And I think we all have that, and kids especially have that. I think, starting new schools, starting new beginnings. So I was thinking about that, but actually I also had heard this incredibly moving story on NPR. It was a journalist, and he was facing cancer, and he was doing a journal of basically his last days. And I was following it because it was really moving about what was important to him and how he was spending his time. And one of the things he said was wanting to make it through to see the fall leaves. So I was, I was thinking about all kinds of transitions that we make as humans. And anyway, so I start with the text, but it's got all kinds of things that are feeding it. And then I often just draw, and I'll go and I'll just sort of like, how does a leaf move? What kind of oak tree has both a red and a yellow leaf in the fall as opposed to just red or yellow leaves? And I do a lot of sketching, and then I make, like a lot of us, I make thumbnails that are just scribbles, and they're really basic, but they've got a lot of information. This is the thumbnail I made for the jacket, and it didn't change a whole lot. Sometimes it does change a whole lot. And like in the lower middle panel, then I do storyboards, and just to kind of get a sense of the pacing of the book. But like if you look at the middle piece there, and the radiating lines, like I was already thinking about how I was going to tackle that piece of art, and here's that final piece of art. And somewhere in there Taya's name is, but I don't. Anyway, yeah. And then I make dummies, because you kind of need to think about how a kid is going to work their way through a book and how they're going to want to go from one page to the next and how a page turn is going to work, what's going to pull them through. And again, these are really small. They're like half size or quarter size. But there's a lot of like honing and figuring it out that I'm doing here. And then I take those really rudimentary drawings and I blow them up and I start making vellums. Because the thing with collage is once you glue it down, it's pretty done. Like, that's it. There's no backsies. So I really make a tight map of what I'm going to do. And I use, again, just the most basic, like I use the same materials that most of us that kids use. I use little pans of gouache paint. I use acetate and cut. I sometimes do some stenciling or some painting to give a patina to the page. And you can see there's the stenciling of the leaves in the final page from that book. And I also cut, like it's so not free form. I cut little stencils that I use to find like the perfect part of the paper to get a gradation or to get the sense of dimension that I'm looking for. And here's my desk when I'm, sort of what it looks like when I'm working. And when I'm doing characters, I'm doing all of them at once, so they float around on my desk like little paper toys. And I actually that's an idea we'll go back to, but it's something that I really like the paper toys. I used to like making things out of paper when I was a kid. So another thing I find about most artists, and it's definitely true with me, is I just like to keep things around that I like. I sort of am a collector and curator, and I find stuff that I find feeds the work that I do maybe less directly. And this is my office. It's tiny, and it's usually not that neat. And this is the table that I really work on. It used to be, I trained as a graphic designer and worked in design for forever. And this was my office table back when I had a studio. And it's our dining room table now, and it never looks like this. It's always got tiny little shoes and messes of paper and scissors and scraps. And that's what it usually looks like. And these are the kinds of things that I keep around me. I like type. You'll sort of see these things sort of showing up throughout my work. I like type. I like juxtapositions. Like, it's interesting to me, different ways to approach a hand or anything. I can't go anywhere without, collecting stones or shells or weird stuff. And I like found photos in the same way I like ephemera, because they've got all these, I end up looking at them and kind of feeling like I'm adopting a new family and wondering what their story was and why they were left behind, and now I own them and not own them, but own them as part of my family. So I love old photos and old bits of natural history. And so these are the stack of letters where the birds are sitting are letters from my grandfather's French girlfriend before he met my grandmother, and I have stacks of them all tied up in these dainty ribbons, and they're all in French, and I felt like it was too invasive to open them, but I just treasure the mystery of what is contained within those. And here's more stuff. I collect a lot of birds' nests, which I saw you have a show of drawings of birds' nests in the other building. I always loved words and pictures. I had a brief moment where I thought I might go into psychology or social work, and then I decided that I was going to go to art school and I was going to be a graphic designer. And oops, that's the wrong way. And so, oops, that's too far. So I started in a big design studio. I worked in London, and I was doing exhibit design, and I was doing brochure design and annual reports, and it was all really fun, and I loved mixing and interpreting words and pictures again, and how you tell the story, and how you work somebody through an idea. But I slowly worked my way down the paid chain and into what I was loving best, which was books. And I love that books are not ephemeral, that books hang around, that they're things that resonate with people and are important, and the stories are, they stay with us. And I was doing book jackets, and I loved that I could get a manuscript that nobody had read, and I get to read it, and then I have to kind of distill it down to kind of one compelling image, and so I was doing that, and that was a disruption or a detour or an off-ramp of sorts. And then I got kind of tired. I mean, one of the things about design is I was sort of I straddled learning to do things by hand, and then we moved into doing things on the computer. And I really missed the messiness and the tactile quality of doing things by hand. So that was another disruption. That was a thing that I was like, it feels so cold to sit in front of the computer all day long. And then this was the last disruption. And that's my daughter, Taya. She never really slept, so that's not true. That's propaganda. She she really literally only slept for 3 hours at any one stretch for the first 3 years of her life. So, and the only way to get her to do that was I had to lie with her like a prisoner, and she would put her hands on me, and she put her feet on me, and I was sort of trapped there with her in the dark, unable to move, because if I moved, she was like, "Oh, is it time to play?" And I was like, "No, go to sleep." So I was bored, and I was a little bit probably crazy from lack of sleep, and I started making up these rhymes for myself to just keep myself, I don't know, it just was a thing to do while I had to wait. And those rhymes became the seeds for my first book, except I didn't know it then. I just thought, thank God I've got something to think about when I'm here. And because I was a graphic designer, and because I liked making things with my hands, I sort of put together this idea of a book, and I put together a jacket, and I thought it was going to be called Tangerines and Jelly Dreams. And then the subtitle was Not So True Stories and Unreasonable Rhymes. And I made some sample pages. And I didn't have a plan. In fact, it never dawned on me that I could do anything really with it. But I sat with it a while, and I thought, well, maybe I should talk to somebody who knows something about something, because I don't know anything about how that works. And, I did the classic stalking other moms on the playground to see if anybody knew anything about publishing or picture books or how one does this thing that I had always collected picture books, so I loved them, but I didn't know how to move forward. And eventually, like a friend of a friend of a friend said, "Oh, you should talk to this one person. She knows something about books." And I did, and she was a book packager, and she said, "Oh, I'll sell your book. Here, you should just give those to me. Give those to me. I'll do something with them." And she sold it to Chronicle Books, and it was amazing. And that became this first book, Not So True Stories and Unreasonable Rhymes. And like I said, I design my books too. And the thing about books is there's so many different entry points for a kid. Like there's the pictures, and that's like one way to enter a book, or there's the story, but there's also sort of how the story sits on the page. Like a graphic novel does one thing, and these are picture books. So what information can you give a kid just by the way you're handling the typography is interesting to me. So, and then because I write and illustrate, I can play with the relationship between the words and the pictures in a different way. I can toggle back and forth and pull words out, or emphasize words, or let the pictures do the talking. So in this poem is sort of a generous word for it, but in this rhyme, there's a contradiction in the picture. If you look at the crocodile, and so I guess it's kind of hard for me to read from this angle. But it's very best of friends. Wily Croc and Goldie Fish were very best of friends until the sad and bitter day with which this story ends. While swimming slowly in the swamp, old Wily gave a yawn. He sucked poor Goldie in his mouth, and gulp, his friend was gone. So with the younger kids, I'll ask them, raise your hand if you think that was just a really sad mistake, and earnestly, like 90% of the hands go up. Like, of course he wouldn't do that. And then with the older kids, there's a snicker, and they notice in the Wiley's pocket the spoon and the fork. So I like adding stuff. Again, another use of the type, and the type actually gets bigger and smaller in addition to making the waves, and it kind of gives you the rhythm of the poem, which is kind of an interesting thing to play with. And here, the fox is gone by dawn without a sign. The foxy leaves no traces, and the type gets very tiny and quiet. So, oh my God, I was so smitten. That was like, I didn't want to do anything else. I just wanted to do the next thing right away. Like, the cool thing about books is that you generate the project. I mean, that's the terrible thing about making books, too. It's all on you to come up from scratch and figure out what you're going to do. But it's the beauty of the project, too. And if you're somebody who has a busy mind and wants to make things, that's such a gift. So I started thinking, well, what am I going to do next? And I was like, well, what about collaging the collages? I really love that. And I don't know if any of you have ever played Exquisite Corpse, where you have the head, and then you fold it, and then you pass it to somebody else, and they draw the middle, and then you pass it to somebody else, and they draw the legs. I mean, probably most of you have done that, yeah. And that started with the Surrealists, and I mean, I just think those are so cool. So here's some early Surrealists, like Man Ray and Dada, and they were doing this game. And here's these ones I like better, even. But yeah, I mean, I loved that kind of idea, and I was like, oh, what if we do like a mix and match type thing, and we I thought it would be a card game, and we had words that would mix and match, and we had like on one side, and we had the images on the other. And I brought it to Chronicle, and they said, great, but we want to make it a book. And so they made, somebody I met yesterday said that there's actually a name for these die-cut books that mix up. But I wrote these alliterative, they're not really poems, but with a noun, a verb, and an adverb, and made these illustrations, and had a lot of fun once I figured out how to make everything line up. So yeah, here's some of that book. And sometimes things, the papers that I use, like, work their way in from other places. Like, this is my great-grandmother's will. Just the cover. I didn't cut up the will, but yeah. And from an old discarded library book. Yeah. And then some mixed up pages. And that last page of that. So I did those two books, and while I was working on All Mixed Up, I got a call from a different publisher. Those were both with Chronicle, and I got a call from Green Willow Books, which is part of HarperCollins, and the art director says, hey, I have this manuscript. I wonder if you'd be interested in illustrating. It's by this guy, Jack Preletsky. And I was really green. I did collect picture books, but I actually didn't know who Jack Preletsky was. And I thought to myself, but no, you see, I write and illustrate my books. But I thankfully didn't say anything as stupid as that. And I said, oh, good, yeah, send it over. And it was, of course, brilliant, as all his stuff is. And it was a really great fit for me, because there's all this double entendre and wordplay, and that's stuff I really love. And so I collect old Army-Navy catalogs and old dictionaries because I love old books. And also I love that they have these engravings in them that are, I think, quite beautiful and just sort of, but they're also copyright free. And I was like, oh, so like his Behold the Bold Umbrellaphant is a set of poems that are these mashups of animals and objects. And I was like, oh, like I could do a mashup, like a collage, but really obvious. And I could use these objects from my old catalogs and let them sort of help create the characters that we're making. And I did. And so with this, actually, I did work digitally in some respect, because I wasn't going to cut up my treasures. So I scanned them, and I would colorize them and play with them in Photoshop, and then print them out. And then those became part of the collages that I was making for the book. And here's Behold the Bold Umbrellaphant. And Jack became the first ever children's poet laureate when this came out, which was pretty cool. Anyway. Yeah. So here's the ballpoint penguins. And, oops. Oh, pop-up toadsters. And toast-a-turns. I don't know. Tweezels of the forest. Cloctopus. The hardest one was there was a zippopotamus, and zippers actually weren't invented till the 1920s. And it was really hard to find a picture. I don't have it in here, but it was really hard to find an old engraving of, I had everything except the zipper. And I ended up going to the Barnard and Columbia libraries looking in old fashion magazines and for old advertisements that would have like an engraving of a zipper that I could finally use. Okay, but the thing about these projects and being self-generated and like having to keep coming up with new ideas or new approaches is that Jack wrote another set of poems. He's like, I made another set of poems for you. And I was like, oh, great. But they were really similar in concept. They were more like mashups of animal and personality traits. And so I was kind of stumped. Like, I can't do the same thing twice. And that would be boring. And so when I get to that really backed into a corner feeling place, I just end up doing research and looking at things I liked, and I was thinking about, I sort of had this little thread of an idea, like animals nobody knows about. And I love old wonder cabinets from the 1500s where people would collect, because I'm a magpie, as you saw, they'd collect amazing things from around the world and they'd put them in boxes and look at them, and it could just be a feather or it could be a piece of coral, and they were just treasures because they were from far away places that nobody could necessarily get to. And it's funny, we were talking about this a little last night. I'm interested in early natural history stuff and how museums work and how things are notated in science. And I start getting excited. Like, I'm starting to feel like, whoa, this is pretty cool. I love all this stuff. And I'm looking at this and starting to collect things that are exciting to me. So old dioramas are another kind of thing, or specimen boxes. And on that table of stuff that I have on the left, I have like botanical specimens are interesting to me, and if I see it at a garage sale, I might pick it up. And I love how it's attached to the book. See, on the left is the actual one, and on the right, I just swiped that idea. I was like, that's good. I'm going to just use that. So on the right is a piece of art from the book where I just took that concept of attaching things. And the dioramas at the Natural History Museum are very beautiful and amazing, and were made by artists, and I just think they're amazing. And I was like, okay, what if this is an archive of animals that nobody remembers, that somebody discovers in the basement of the Natural History Museum, and I make dioramas. And I made this little sample diorama, and I went into my publisher, and I said, here, look, what if we do dioramas, like paper dioramas? And she kind of looked at me a little bit like, And she said, well, could you do that for a whole book? And I was like, yes, absolutely, yes, definitely. And she said, okay. And I left and then probably had one of the most terrifying feelings, because I had no idea really how to do this for a whole book. I just liked the idea. But I have found that being scared is a really rich place in life. Like, that's a creative gem when you get to that corner. And this was a really exciting project to move from doing these very flat, two-dimensional collages to making the art for Stardines, and some of the art is kinetic, like this jacket. I mean, not that it's not kinetic on the jacket itself, but those are they all move in the wind. And I used beeswax, and I used wire, and I used all kinds of things that it was just really fun. And I made the whole book. I'm really interested in the whole parts of the book. So this is the case, and you're kind of working your way into the archiving process of this archive of forgotten animals. So here are the end papers, and I built all of this stuff, and then I photographed it with my friend Porter, and we kind of just ad-libbed. We just kind of figured it out. But yeah, so Stardines. Here's the Bluffalo. So that sample illustration that I brought in became this. And again, like I had to I used all these sort of, like those pins are the pins that people use when they do insect specimens, for example, in a specimen box. And so I made all the pieces of art, including the parts that the text were going to go on, and then we photographed those. Nod to Caps for Sale, which was one of my favorite books as a kid. And this is a swappetist who likes trading things, and I didn't know when I got the poem, I just had the manuscript. I was like, what in the heck is a swappetist? Like, is it a platypus? But it turns out it's a wapetist is a kind of elk. Plandas, always making plans, but never keeping them. And I know some people like that. Reindeer that have so many thoughts, but no ability to speak them. Tattlesnakes. You probably know one of those if you have a little brother. Oh, there's the swappetist again. Oh, slobster. And sometimes, like, things, like, okay, so the slobster, like, again, like, there's all these layers, like, my beloved cousin Sarah, when she was little, we were camping in Maine, and it rained, and it rained, and it rained, and we were just drenched and messy, and we had been camping for many days in the rain, and we went to a fancy inn in Maine for just just for tea, for a little, just to get warm, and Sarah ate two things. She ate sardines that you had to hold them up like a seal, and she would eat them, and she ate peas. So we ordered her a plate of peas, and when we got up, we looked different than, everybody in the whole restaurant. We looked like old little hippie kids. And we got up, and there were smushed peas in a big circle all around our table from Sarah. So I had to use peas in the slobster. So I just loved working three-dimensional. I felt like it was really accessible. I don't know, as a kid, I made dioramas, well, not dioramas, but, I made 3D shoebox things for school sometimes for a project, and it just felt like a thing that kids, it's a medium kids work with. And then also, I was thinking about, I don't know how many of you, I'm sure everybody has had one of those really early childhood experiences where you're by yourself and you make a discovery without a grown-up to translate it and tell you, no, that's not really how it works. So you kind of come up with your own version. And I think that kid space, like for me, I was a really, I was shy, I was sort of internal. I was thinking about those private, just the beauty of that imagined world that we had when we were little, and tapping into that. And I loved working three-dimensional, and I ended up writing this story about this bear who had never, it was his first winter coming up, and he was really excited to really get to spring. That's what he was curious about. And everybody's like, no, you gotta wait. And anyway, and remember the paper toys I said were all over my I was like, yeah, and paper toys, and I was thinking about those and sort of the toyness of them. And I was thinking about stuff that I like old, like I'm interested in old optical things, so old perspective boxes from the 1600s. Artists would make them, and you'd peek inside, and these whole worlds would open up, and sort of that quiet magic that you have all by yourself that you experience solo. And this is what it looks like peeking in. And, oopsie. Victorian tunnel books are these books that are flat, and then you open them up, and again, these whole, like kind of like a pop-up book, right? But early ideas of pop-up books, and yet this whole world happens. But again, it's just for one person to kind of have that experience one at a time. And optical toys, and peep shows, and paper toy theaters. There's a really cool paper toy theater in the Mazza Museum that I was interested to see. And so that started sort of just feeding and informing how I might approach the work, since I wanted to work three-dimensionally. And again, this picture of sort of process. So, and this is how we photographed it. It was just in my friend's apartment, and we just kind of like, what we wanted to create, well, with Stardines, what we wanted to create were photographs that looked unprofessional in a way. Like we wanted the lighting to be sloppy and kind of like just a scientist had quickly archived them. But for this, we wanted to create a peeking in kind of quality, and we were thinking about that when we were taking the photos. And so this book became Finding Spring, and it's about this little bear kind of having his own personal discovery. So winter was coming, and everybody's getting ready for winter. But all he could think about was spring. And his mama said they had to wait, but he had other ideas. So when she went to sleep, off he went into the forest. And he kind of checked in with some forest friends, and they all said, oh, yeah, you got to wait for spring. But he just wasn't going to, and off he went. And he starts making a discovery. And then he has his perfect spring moment where he's made his discovery and heads home with a little bit of snow and a nod to the snowy day. And of course, everybody else is already hibernating. And he wakes up, and of course, spring is gone. But the forest friends are like, well, let's go look for what you found. And they follow his path, and everything's changed. And they finally have a different kind of discovery, a collective community discovery, and spring. So, yes, well, this is me at work. So I wrote all of us, actually, in the face of feeling like so many people that I cared about, that were part of my life, were feeling worried and feeling ostracized and feeling not included. And I, particularly kids and vulnerable people, so I wrote all of us really in response to that, to just make a book that was about inclusion and about community and the importance of difference and the beauty of difference. And so that was all of us. And then the last thing I have, is a sneak peek. So as you must have gathered by now, like these books are pretty personal. I feel like they come from a place of, thinking about myself as a kid, what I needed, what my child needed, and also just things that I love and care about. And my new book that's coming out this spring is In the Night Garden. And Taya, my daughter, was a little bit afraid of night, and I felt like I had to show her that there was a real beauty in that transformation of the unknown. That when you don't know something, that usually if you look closely, there's a lot of beauty hidden in there. So In the Night Garden is a book it's a really simple story just about being in the garden at night and finding that beauty. And so here's some art from that. That's the jacket. And it's definitely became a more is more is more project. I thought, it happened I did the art during the pandemic, and I thought, a great chance to really chill out and be a little bit less uptight and just free form. And instead, I went all in and went the other way. So, here's some of the art. So we have a tiny little house out in the country, and the other day I was working in the garden, and there was actually a hoot owl, just like in the book, that was 30 feet from me, just staring at me. And I was so excited. Anyway, this is some of the art. Yeah, so that's what I have. Do you guys have any questions? Yeah. Yeah, so I make the art 110% bigger usually than the art in the book. And it's just like, if you take a photo and you blow it up, or a piece of type and you blow it up and it gets really kind of rough. If you do the opposite, it kind of gives you a little forgiveness. So I just make it a tiny bit bigger. Yeah. Yeah.
My question is actually in a similar vein to that. It was particularly about that first book cover that you showed, the mostly untrue stories. Mm-hmm. I was curious about the size, and since there's so many different elements on it, did you collage all of that onto one sheet, or did you take different elements and switch them around in post?
No, I work all by hand. I really do it in reaction to. I still do some design work, and I just need to use my hands. So it's all done on one sheet of paper. It's very flat, unless it's three-dimensional, and it's all cut out and glued on with the basically Elmer's glue-like glue. Yeah. I know, a little compulsive. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Well, I think my husband kind of does. He's like, can we get rid of some of this stuff? But he has his own, things he is interested in, has a lot of, that I could get rid of to make more room for my stuff, so, Yeah.
Because you collect so many things, do you ever find something and then find yourself inspired by that one little thing, saying, this would be a great, and suddenly a story comes or an illustration comes from that one found object? Or do the ideas in the stories always come first, and then you look through your collection to find what would match? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It's a funny, I wouldn't say that things come from one object. None of my stories have come from one object, but they do come from the juxtaposition and the vision of those things. Like, I mean, I don't think I would have ever come up with the idea of doing a, like, if I wasn't interested in natural history, I would have probably taken a totally different path for sardines, So I think it's the stuff that's around kind of just bakes in and becomes and percolates out. And so when the right idea comes along, it's like, oh, I need to go look at these things that I have.
So those are more like the seeds for you.
Yeah, like they just sit and wait to be just, to come to fruition. Yeah. So I can't get rid of them.
Yes.
Oh gosh, yeah. So many, and I hung on. No idea I was going to go into picture books, but I hung on to I loved my picture books as a kid, and I loved. There were so many. Actually, Sarah's dad, my uncle, for many years when I was little, would send really odd picture books to me. They were odd. They weren't like the ones that everybody else had necessarily, and I loved them. And I had Bill Pete's Hubert's Hair-Raising Adventure. I don't know if you know that one, which I still read when I'm sad because it's so funny. And I liked Harold and the Purple. I mean, I just liked so many. Harold and the Purple Crayon was The Lonely Doll. I mean, that obviously doesn't inform my work, but was just kind of mesmerizing, this whole life and weird. I don't know, there was something just a little about the photography that I was really curious about as a kid. There were lots, yeah. Oh, In the Night Kitchen. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, Carin. Carin, we're glad you ended up illustrating and authoring books for us to share. And also the importance that was very visible in your presentation, the importance of visual storytelling. Thank you for that as well. It's something that all of these guests here this weekend do on a day-to-day basis, so we thank you.